In one shot produces as much energy as 3 average German houses need per day. Need every day. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So every 10th of a second you can give houses in 3 houses enough energy for a day.
Exactly.
Tom Forner, thank you so much for finding the time to join us today at Progress Voices. We met just a couple of months ago at a congress, and it's absolutely fantastic to have you here with us. Thank you so much for coming along and telling us about your brilliant company, which is working in fusion energy. If I understand, that basically means you're trying to recreate what the sun has been doing for millions of years, so that we can use that kind of energy here on the planet. But maybe it's better if you explain in your own words what focused energy is, what fusion energy is. So focused energy is your company, fusion energy is the technology we're going to talk about. But before I do the whole introduction for you, why don't you explain who you are and why we're here today?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Nick. It's great to be part of your podcast. What we are doing is we are bringing the energy of the stars on Earth. You said it right. We are trying to replicate what the sun is doing, but as you know, on Earth we don't have the same mass, we don't have the same gravity, so we do need different mechanisms to get energy out of fusion. And research in fusion energy has been going on since more than 50 years. A lot in magnetic fusion, but behind the fence already for more than 20 years in laser fusion. And what do you mean behind the fence? Behind the fence means it came from mainly national labs like the Lawrence Livermore National Lab in California. They did laser fusion for their weapon stack because it's very similar to what you need for a hydrogen bomb. So it was for simulations for hydrogen bombs. But you could a very similar mechanism that you cannot use for weapons, but you can use it for energy production. And what we have seen in December 2022, but already before that in August 2021 is what we call a burning plasma, and then first net energy gain in December 2022. Since then, we have seen many times net energy gain. And meanwhile, a few weeks ago, we saw the first net energy gain with a gain of 4. This means it's proven that we can get energy out of fusion. Now, the only thing that we have to do is make it commercially viable and as a power plant and not as a science experiment. And that's what we are here for.
Brilliant. So if I understand correctly, you founded a company a few years back, and this company is there to take not a new science, a science that's been around, I think, actually since the 1930s, but certainly it's been researched since the 80s. And you're taking this science, which is relatively new, and just in the last few years, we've proven that this science can work. And this science is there to put some energy into something and get a lot more energy out. In a similar process to an atomic power station, but I think there's a few key differences between atomic energy as we've known it in the past with power stations like the famous one Chernobyl, and to actually create power in a different way using a different physical approach. Do you want to just explain a little bit about what's the difference between old school atomic energy and what we're talking about here?
Yeah, so we're basically talking about fission and fusion. So in fission, you use very heavy elements, so heavy atoms like uranium, and you cut it. So you split it up, and once you're starting splitting it up, it ends up in a chain reaction. So it never stops splitting anymore. And you never know what elements will come out of the split. So these are mainly very radioactive elements that you produce, which produces then the nuclear waste. And nuclear waste that lasts for thousands, 10,000s, or even 100,000s of years. That's what we know from fission power plants. Also the chain reactions we know from Chernobyl, from other incidents. Fusion is very different. So while fission is easy to start, but you can never stop it, fusion is completely the opposite. It's very tough to start it, and it stops automatically. So in fusion, you use very light elements, basically hydrogen and isotopes from hydrogen. And you always have the same product. So if you merge these isotopes, you always get a neutron. So I'm speaking now about DT fusion, which means deuterium and tritium. So if you merge these elements, you always get helium and a neutron. And you get energy out of that because the new core that you create is slightly lighter than the two initial cores. And the mass in between is released by EMC squared. And this produces huge amounts of energy. And energy in form of heat, and the heat you can use for creating steam, use steam turbines, and create electricity.
So basically what we're talking about is a different way of creating heat. If we look at a traditional fission, so the traditional splitting the atom, atomic power plant, a thing that we've been using since the 50s, then also the thing that's used in modern atomic bombs or all atomic bombs so far, then what we're talking about is splitting an atom. When we split the atom, it creates the chain reaction, and the chain reaction creates the heat. And we use the heat to create steam, and we use the steam to create electricity with a turbine, with a water wheel, putting it simply. What we're talking about from your side is we're actually taking two atoms and pushing them together, right? So it's not splitting one atom, it's taking two very small atoms and pushing them together, and then something else comes out of that. And we're going to talk about the science in a bit more detail in a second, but have I understood the principle correctly?
Absolutely. It's absolutely correct. And helium is not radioactive. The neutron hits the wall. It carries the energy. It activates the inner wall, but we don't create any nuclear waste. So we create some radioactivity, if you speak about the inner wall and the reactor chamber, but that's it. And it's very short-lasting nuclear waste because it decays within 50 years.
Okay.
And then you can just reuse it.
Okay, so you have an area that you're using. It does become radioactive, but the radioactive levels are much lower and also much more short-lived than carbon-14.
And you even have radioactive material if you use coal or oil, because your ash produces radioactive material.
Yeah. So you told me that when we met. So when you have a carbon-fired power station, which is just the same principle, you use carbon to create heat to create steam to create electricity. And that carbon is also radioactive after you've used it as well, right?
Yeah, because in the ash, the material you burn is never completely clean. So you have other elements in your fuel. And once you burn it, you produce ash, and this ash is radioactive.
Excellent. So if we now break this one down and we start talking about the science, I've promised we're going to do a little bit of a 101 on the science of all this stuff, because you can imagine I've been listening to quite a few podcasts on this. I studied physics myself. My buddy came over who I studied with. He was here at Easter, and I was just using the whole time to ask him, so I didn't look stupid today. But let's maybe just kind of break this down and let's talk about atoms, right? So if we talk about hydrogen, that's actually the lightest atom. For those that watched out at school, then we had something called a periodic table, and at the top left you find hydrogen because it's got one proton, right? And no neutron. Now that's the important bit, right? Because every element in its normal natural state, I think, has the same number of electrons as it has protons. And the protons are positive, the electrons are negative, and so long as you leave it that way, then it's going to be happy. More or less correct?
Yeah.
If we go to helium, then that's got two protons, two electrons, and one neutron, I think. Whereas if we look at what you're using, it's something called an isotope. Now, can you just explain to us what an isotope is?
Isotope is a chemical element with, in the nucleus, the same amount of protons, but a different amount of neutrons. If you, again, use hydrogen as an example, you have... hydrogen has two isotopes. One is deuterium, which you find is like every 3,000th molecule or atom in tap water.
Okay.
And you can just filter it.
Okay.
And then you have tritium, and tritium has two neutrons.
Okay.
And tritium is radioactive, so it's not stable. You have to produce it. You can produce it in fission reactors. It's not available on Earth if you don't produce it.
Okay.
It only and this decays within a few years. So right now there are roughly 22 kilograms of tritium existing on this planet.
Okay.
And it's rather getting less than more.
Okay.
But this is a part of the element that is an element that we are using in our fusion reaction.
And you actually create that inside your reactor,
yes.
or?
Yeah. So what we're going to have in fusion is what we call a closed fuel cycle. So to run a power plant, we actually only need tap water or seawater.
Okay.
As we produce the tritium in the chamber.
Okay.
So we have lithium in the chamber, and if you shoot a neutron into a lithium blanket, the neutron and the lithium produces tritium.
Okay.
And that's how you produce your tritium, and then you can fill your targets again with your own tritium.
So, just to pick everyone up again, what we're saying is we're taking a hydrogen atom. And there's a type of hydrogen atom, an isotope of hydrogen, as we'd call it, which has a neutron in it.
Yes.
Normal hydrogen doesn't have it. Deuterium does have it. Yeah. And then there's another one, and it's got two neutrons in it, and that's called tritium.
Yes.
So what we're doing is we're kind of taking two strange kinds of hydrogen, and then in the actual physical reaction, what you're doing is you're kind of pushing those two atoms together, and they form a helium, if I remember rightly.
Exactly.
Yeah?
Exactly.
Because remember we said that hydrogen has no neutrons and it has one proton. Helium has two protons. So when we push these two elements with single protons together, they turn into a different element, right?
Yes. This is exactly what we're doing.
Okay, it sounds so simple, Sounds so simple, but it's not that simple, is it? Can you tell us how you actually do that? How do you get to that point?
You have to create a plasma, and this means you have to compress your fuel. It means your deuterium and tritium, and you need to overcome your repelling forces. And once you have done that, your fusion reaction starts. And this means you have to put in a lot of energy to create this situation, to create this atmosphere. And then the fusion reaction starts, and it goes like a burn wave through your fuel. So the heat goes up, and the one reaction causes the next reaction.
Okay.
And this burns through your fuel, and this releases the energy. And that's how you produce, with a very small amount of fuel, a huge amount of energy.
Okay, so that means when you're saying it's 1,000 times density, what you're saying is you're taking something that's a certain size and you're making it 1,000 times smaller, but it's got all the same things inside still.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's like taking a balloon and you don't let any air out, but you squeeze and squeeze and squeeze the balloon down, then the air's going to get closer and closer and smaller together, right?
Exactly.
But in your case, it's not air, it's deuterium, it's tritium. So the two isotopes of hydrogen that you're squeezing together, and you squeeze them so close together to get over the repulsion forces then.
Exactly.
Excellent. Okay. How do you squeeze it?
We squeeze it with lasers.
Of course you do.
So they use photons, and we have a certain design of lasers and a certain design of our fuel. The fuel you can imagine as a very tiny pellet, so like the size of a peppercorn. And we shoot the lasers on the shell, and the shell vaporizes, and this vaporization of the shell causes kind of a rocket engine, and the forces then push everything towards the middle of this tiny pellet and squeezes it together and creates this very dense blob, which is then from, let's say, 4 millimeters in size to a micrometer in size. And this is then your dense blob you have for a couple of billionths of a second.
Couple of billionths of a second.
Yeah.
You couldn't make this stuff up, could you? This is proper deep tech here we're talking about.
Tech, yeah. indeed.
So what you're saying, you take the lasers, you use the lasers, they basically melt through the outer shell, and inside is where the deuterium and the tritium is.
Yeah. So in the capsule, so in the pellet, you have different layers. So the capsule, part of the layer is how we fill in the deuterium tritium. You have to cool it down to minus 180 degrees, so it's a cryo target, so that you really can compress it. You could not compress it if it's warm. And then you use this tiny pellet, shoot it into the chamber, hit it with a laser, compress it, and once you compress it, you heat it up at the same time. So you compress and heat up at the same time. It's like a diesel engine, where you compress and heat your fuel, the same we do with our pellet. And in the middle, it creates the heat, the amount of heat that we need. It's roughly 140 million degrees. And then your fusion reactions start. They propagate through your target faster than the target can disappear, because the speed of your burn wave is like 10% of the speed of light, while the target can only disappear with the speed of sound. This means your fuel burns through by 30-40%. And then it all disappears.
And how hot did you say it was going to be?
Oh, it's in the core, it's roughly 140 million degrees.
140 million degrees. Tom,
But only on a micrometer in the center.
Do you remember that game Top Trumps? Did you have that, like in Germany? It's like a card game where, you, like for instance, I have one card, you have the other card. Which one's
we play this all the time.
I'm going to take focused energy. If I'm doing Top Trumps, I want your card. That's like you remember the military bridge. It won on everything, the heaviest, the biggest. Okay, so these are just numbers that make me go, wow. I mean, it's really it's incredible. So I mean, you've got this much heat at the middle of something. How big is this thing? Should we not worry about your whole factory burning down or your power plant?
As it's on such a small, tiny spot, as it disappears towards the chamber, the inner walls, it starts cooling down. And I mean, energy is all about space. If once it reaches the inner wall, it is roughly 700 to 800 degrees. This is a perfect temperature for your heat exchange. The heat exchange is within the chamber, so you have different blankets, you have different liquids for your heat exchange, and this allows you ultimately to produce then the steam at the outside, and then it's conventional. It's conventional technology that is used in power plants, like in gas, in coal, in fission. So it's mainly very comparable to what you use as conventional technology in fission.
Okay, then. So, when you talk about a heat exchanger, for those that don't know, what we're talking about there is something that gets the heat out of your chamber so that you can use it to create steam on the outside, right? Yes. Okay. So, I mean, this is absolutely incredible stuff to talk about. And if I've understood correctly, the reason why you cool the pearl, the peppercorn, the fuel, the reason why you cool that down is because it's going to get hot on its own when you compress it. You mentioned something about you heat it up, but what you mean is by compressing it heats itself up.
It's about the acceleration, so the speed of how fast how strongly you accelerate the elements. This creates heat and pressure. At the same time. So this allows you to compress and heat it up at the same time.
And when you said, so everything that happens on the outside is basically the same as a conventional power station, I believe that you've recently signed a deal where you're potentially already got your own old conventional power station that you're allowed to build your new facility, your new, let's say, procedure to create heat. You're going to be taking an old power station and changing it, potentially. At least you're looking into that at the moment. Is that correct?
That's correct. Actually, what we have entered into is a study that we are doing together with RWE, how to transition a fission power plant into a fusion research center and fusion power plant. The question is there existing infrastructure that can be reused? And you can definitely say there's a lot. Question is, what do you have to invest to transition it? What elements you can use? What elements have to be built new? But the space is there. The connection to the grid is there. a lot of infrastructure for cooling, exhaustive heat, water is there. So this is definitely, and also the area has all the approvals already that we are going to need. The only challenge is now in 2017, there was the decision in Germany to get out of nuclear energy. There is a very tight corset. Do you call it corset?
Corset, for clothes.
For how they have to decommission these power plants. And the goal is now to get out of this, and instead of completely decommissioning it, reusing it and reusing the money for building something new instead of decommissioning it completely.
I see. So I see what you mean with the corset now. You mean there's been some legislation that says we have to destroy. Okay, I see. I understand what you mean now. Yeah. No, so I get that. So hopefully we can now persuade the governments to say, look, instead of taking all the old atomic power plants to bits, let's keep them a little bit. Let's change the technology to something safer, and we'll talk about the safety aspect in a minute. And then we can use that whole kind of like infrastructure again, like you say, all the concrete's already there, all the actual power plant part of creating steam to create electricity is still available. Okay then.
And also the people, the talent, so engineers. Biblis is I think a fantastic example. Biblis was built, I think it was in the 70s. I'm sorry, probably end of 60s, but in the 70s mainly. They built this whole site, and we're speaking about a 2.6 gigawatt fission power plant that was producing 40% of the total energy of Hessen, of the state of Hessen. And they shut it down. And this whole power plant in the 70s was built within 5 years. And at the peak, we had more than 5,000 people working there. So this was an incredible project, very comparable to the speed of China, how China is building today. We can do that as well. We demonstrated that we can do it. We still could do it today if we are allowed to.
And it's a lot about waiting for people to make decisions, I believe.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. No, I saw that when I was driving here today. I went through some roadworks that have been there for 10, 15 years maybe, and they don't seem to be anywhere close to being finished just right now. I don't understand how a few kilometers of roadworks on a motorway can take so long to build, but that's probably something for another podcast. Now, I was going to talk a little bit about politics later on, but we've already got in there, and I believe what you're doing, your company, it's I don't know if supported is the right word, we need to be careful, but the new Chancellor of Germany, we're recording this podcast today. It is the 7th of May 2025. So yesterday we got a new Chancellor. It was quite an exciting vote because they had to do it twice. But I believe Friedrich Merz has already supported you, or at least said that he likes what you're doing. Maybe you should say which word we should use, because support with politics can always give the wrong impression.
For energy, you need political support, and you always needed it in the past. So any new energy source had to get to the grid always had political support. You need it for regulation. You also need it for the first of a kind power plants. So this was the case for fission. This was the case for solar. This was the case for wind wheels. So like in the last 20 years, we have, I think Germany has paid in subsidies like 220 billion to support solar.
220?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a huge amount.
Yeah.
And we were in the lucky situation that at our very early days, when we founded the company, we had immediately very strong support from the state of Hessen and from all different parties. So the Christian Democrats, SPD, so as well as Green Party. So the
left and the right side and the Greens in the middle. Yeah.
Probably the reason is why we started as a deep tech spin-off of University of Darmstadt. So the University of Darmstadt is still a shareholder of Focused Energy. We created a program that was very new for Germany, how university can participate in the success of a startup by bringing in IP. Okay. That's what we did at the very beginning. And this enabled us or helped us to get in contact with politicians. And there was a lot of support in the early days from Ines Klaus, from Boris Rhein, also from a bit later on from the new economic minister Mansouri. So they are all extremely supportive to us. They provided us with initial subsidies, with not subsidies, grants to build our target lab. So we have invested in our target lab here in Darmstadt more than 10 million in the build out of this target lab. This was possible because of political support and grants. So this really helped us to also with grants raise additional private money to get the funding that we need to build such complex deep tech machines, R&D labs that we need on the path to fusion.
And how far away are we from actually getting fusion? When can I plan to charge my new electric vehicle with fusion energy?
Our roadmap is to. We already have this targetry lab where we build our pellets, our fuel. This is already existing. This is where we have a lot of IP. This is where we are starting mass producing these pellets. So in a power plant, we will need 1 million of these tiny pellets per day.
A million of the pellets per day?
We shoot 10 times a second, so this ends up to 870,000 per day.
So we talked about this. What you're saying is you're going to be shooting one of these peppercorns, these special peppercorns, but of course they're not pepper. They're filled with deuterium, tritium, with a case around the outside, and that's the thing you're going to be heating up with, or compressing, with lasers. And you're going to do that 10 times a second, right?
Yes, exactly.
And if you do that 10 times a second, how much energy do you get out of one shot, 1/10 of a second?
In one shot produces as much energy as 3 average German houses need per day. Need every day.
Wow. Yeah. So every 10th of a second you can give 3 houses enough energy for a day.
Exactly.
Is that including the hairdryer?
Yeah, it's including the hairdryer. It's including the toaster, the hairdryer, the vacuum cleaner, so anything you have in a household.
Just the idea of having something that can shoot out a pellet every 10th of a second, that's pretty good going, right? And what happens with the pellet afterwards? It's gone, right? It's burnt itself.
Yeah, we have a closed fuel cycle, so there is some minor material, some minor ash. But we recycle this. So we recycle this. We get our own tritium from the chamber.
Yeah.
We use additional deuterium, and we have our target production then on site. So this is going to be a really completely separate piece at each power plant where we have just-in-time production of these tiny pellets.
That's crazy. So all you're taking really is water.
Yeah. Exactly.
And then the casing, that'll have some kind of material, I guess.
This what makes fusion really the only energy source where you can decouple energy production from resource consumption.
That's interesting, because I was going to talk to you about the whole thing. We've got renewable energy now. We've got wind, we've got solar, we've got hydro energy, like as in generators in the water bobbing up and down. We're investing a lot of money, or you're asking the world, whether it be governments, whether it be private money, but you're asking people to invest in a new technology. And I do think it's going to take quite a while until we get to the point where we can commercialize that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. You probably can compare it. What you've seen is a major scientific breakthrough. Typically, if you have seen a really scientific breakthrough, you can enter engineering. And engineering then takes quite some time, especially if you have such challenging topics. In the past, we had such breakthroughs with steam engines. We had such breakthroughs with flying.
The Wright brothers,
The Wright brothers, the Wright flyer moment. Wright flyer moment was 38 seconds, 12 seconds, 38 meters. And it took another 2 decades to get a passenger plane. This is a very comparable time spent for fusion. As we have started already, we do a lot of engineering. We have a very detailed engineering roadmap. We have identified the different challenges that we still have. We have defined solutions, how we can meet these challenges. But it requires a lot of engineering work. It requires money, it requires talent. So this means step by step, with building intermediate facilities, you get to your first fusion power plant, which we aim for mid of the 2030s. So like 2035, 2036, this is when we will start operating our prototype fusion power plant, which is supposed to deliver the first net engineering energy gain, where we really have enough energy to put it to the grid. And this is the most important step then to build the first of a kind.
So you're saying that within the next 10 years we can actually plan with using this energy. I mean, this is fascinating. We spoke earlier on, and Progress Factors sponsored IATA's, the International Air Trade Association. We sponsored the first ever Sustainable Aviation Fuel Symposium, and we were talking about a lot longer timeframes there, even though it's a technology that's known how to be refined. But building the refineries, we needed to start in the next 5 years to make sure that we're finished by 2050. You're talking about in the next 10 years we can plan with buying energy from Focused Energy or one of your partners.
With buying, I mean, there's a difference in between demonstrating with the prototype fusion power plant that you can do it, and then building more power plants to really sell energy. And building a power plant always takes time. So even if you have everything ready today, to build a gigawatt power plant, it requires 4 to 5 years from plan to operation. So it means to the real rollout for energy production is going to be late 30s and during the 40s and 50s. So this is when fusion can have an impact on how we produce energy in our country and in other countries.
And if we've already got wind energy, why do we need fusion energy? You know, I think I can guess an answer, but I'd rather hear yours than guess my own.
I'm a big fan of renewables and also storage. So I think it's not competitive. It's complementary. Wind wheels, solar panels, solar parks. These are rather small power plants, so like in the megawatt range. We are aiming to rather bigger ones, but we need more base load and demand following power plants. So it means the wind and sun you cannot predict. Even storage is mitigating it somehow, but it's still not predictable. And if you want to have a stable grid, you need base load, and you will likely always need it. And then you need a lot of energy for the industry. So if you like chemical industry, pharmaceutical industry, they all need heat, industrial heat, process heat. Solar and wind cannot produce directly heat. We do. Also, if you speak about storage again, like hydrogen, fusion power plant can produce hydrogen. So we just use the high temperatures and can periodically produce hydrogen, which is much more efficient than electrolysis. So this is another way of how you could use fusion. And ultimately, if we want to get rid of fossil fuels, we have to think of how do we drive our ships in the future. And only to produce enough e-fuel for ships, we would roughly in Europe need another 100 gigawatt power plants to produce just the fuel to send them away, another 100 to bring them back, and this is and this is not even now including AI or new data centers. So if you look at recent publications about the requirements for AI, there are some studies that speak about a data center where a single data center might require 10 gigawatt of electricity.
Whoa!
So this is this is nothing that we have seen before. So if you want to be still technology, a country that drives technology, then we have to have energy available, because the energy will drive our capabilities in other sectors. And I think we are in Germany in a very strong position.
So, I mean, this is really speaking to my heart, because the whole thing about progress factors is about helping people to create a better world that's sustainable. We don't like the idea of doing less. Now, reduce, stopping waste, that's a great thing. If we talk about process heat, I remember we did a project during COVID with a large pharmaceutical company, and the efficiencies that the people who worked there came up with, and the way that they started working with energy differently, meant that the energy savings they had actually paid for 5 of our consultants to work with them for a year. Now, that wasn't the project to help them with those energies. That was just one of the things that came out of it. But obviously saving money, being more economic with our resources, that's something that we're interested in. But the idea of saying we're not allowed to travel, we're not allowed to go to foreign lands, we're not allowed to use aeroplanes, that frustrates me. And I would, I have an electric vehicle myself, whether it's more sustainable than the predecessor, that's something that probably you'd need to do a lot of research into. But I'm certainly investing into future technologies. But what I really want is, I want the future to be brighter and better than the past. And not for us to save the planet by staying at home, not going on holiday, not visiting our friends, And if we look at things like data centers, I heard recently that cloud computing, meanwhile, takes up 2% of the world's carbon output comes from cloud computing. That's the same as all the airplanes. Yeah. So we're using just as much energy on cloud computing as we've used in the past for flying. And so really what we're saying is we're actually planning with more consumption and not less in the future, but you've got a clean way of doing that, if I learned correctly, or?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's one simple correlation. If you look at energy and wealth, health, so all indicators that are important for our well-being, then it's completely correlated over the last 150 years with the output, the production of energy. Mm-hmm. So in other words, progress can only be done with energy. Mm-hmm. So if it's our own energy that we put into creating ideas, mm-hmm. this is also energy. We need the energy as well for anything we develop in deep tech, in computing, and whatever you pick. So there is no way of stopping producing energy. I think the only way forward is to ultimately use fusion as a source, as fusion is powering the universe. And this is the only energy source that is more or less unlimited.
So what we're basically saying is, if we can recreate the sun, or lots of very small stars, lots of very small suns on the Earth, then we'll have enough energy to keep growing and to keep progressing in society.
Well, it's probably the breakthrough in fusion and making fusion energy accessible is probably comparable with the discovery of fire. So with discovery of chemical energy. So as we discovered chemical energy and later on the steam engine, this was the biggest impact on productivity that we have ever seen. And it is just the amount of per capita available energy. And we increased this first phase, discovering or unleashing, unveiling chemical energy, increased the energy per capita by more than 1,000 times. We are now speaking with fusion to maybe increase it another 1,000,000 times over. So this is, I think, what we could do is we cannot even imagine. So if you speak about new developments like carbon capture, like desalination, this all requires energy. Mm-hmm. If you have enough energy, you can use it. You can just filter carbon out of our atmosphere again. If you use desalination, you can just replant whole areas, and so it's just going to be very different from how we're living today.
I absolutely love this moment because, we've got a purpose, and we've had this for about 5 years now. And we said the purpose of Progress Factors is to help the world to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees by 2040. Now, we know that that's not possible, especially at the moment. We've gone above that. And we love to have that conversation and go into that dialogue with potential new clients or anyone, to be honest, that I meet at a party. The poor fools for speaking with me. But the whole idea for us is that it's not about working with the technology we have today. It's about creating a better future. And every project we've worked in, we've set moonshot goals, we've set unachievable goals. And the people we've worked with, and I'm nervous at the start of all of our projects that we're going to mess it up this time. You know, you've got some pretty well-known clients, and you just don't want to be that consultancy company that wasted a lot of money. But when the people then start coming back with these absolutely amazing technologies, and not just technologies, sometimes just ways of talking to each other in a different way, communicating differently throughout the company, learning best practices from each other, we just see how inefficient the world runs. And I think what you're talking about here as well is if we have this amount of energy, then we're also in a better position, like you mentioned, carbon recapture, to actually reverse global warming, to become, net positive in the sense of that we're actually doing some good and not doing some bad with energy, right?
Absolutely. Fusion energy can not only stop climate change, it has the potential to revert it ultimately.
That's fantastic. Now let's just talk about some of the different people who are actually working on fusion energy, because yours isn't the only company by far. And there was a big breakthrough a couple of years ago over in California. And so if you'd like to tell us a little bit about Livermore, what they did there. I think you mentioned it briefly at the start, but you're working on one kind of technology, they've got a similar one. But firstly, if you can just explain what happened in December 2022.
Sure. So first of all, Livermore was designed in the 90s, was built 90s and early 2000s. So then they did experiments for more than a decade to then get to the first net energy gain. Seems long, but if you look at it a bit more deeper, we only speak about roughly 400 experiments they needed to get to net energy gain. And so what they did, they hired fantastic talents. They had enough money to do experiments. They had a clear goal, and the physics was known that it works since underground tests of hydrogen bombs.
Okay.
Because in hydrogen bomb you use a fission bomb. This fission bomb creates X-rays, and the X-rays compresses the hydrogen, and the hydrogen is then the bigger bomb, which then explodes it's a fusion explosion. It's a fusion reaction.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But it's different from energy production, but the physics is very comparable. Mm-hmm. And what Livermore does is kind of a model, a simulation for a hydrogen bomb. Okay. So you have what you call is a golden cage. It's a hole realm, mm-hmm. And this hole realm, in the middle of this hole realm, there is a tiny pellet. This pellet is very comparable to ours. Mm-hmm. And what Livermore does, they shoot with a laser in this hole realm around the pellet, and the laser beams are transitioned into X-rays, and the X-rays compress the pellet, which is the same step as I explained before from the hydrogen bomb, the fission bomb that creates the X-rays. In this case, it's the lasers that create the X-rays, mm-hmm. and compress it. And then you start the fusion reactions, and this is what we have seen as net energy gain. So this is the physics that was proven with this indirect drive hole realm model at Livermore in first burning plasma in August 21, first net energy gain in December 2022. And this is the physics that is proven since then. It was, as I said, it was already kind of known from underground tests, but this is the first real experiment that succeeded.
Okay, and so when you say the first experiment that succeeded, when we talk about net energy gain, what we're actually saying is we're talking about how much energy goes into the whole round, this golden cage. Yeah. That's got the what you would call the fuel inside it, which is the deuterium and the tritium. and the amount of energy you get out of this reaction. But there's a whole lot of other stuff happening to the left and to the right of that step, right? You've actually got to create that light in the lasers. We talk about something called wall plug efficiency there, right?
So you're right. So there are two different kinds of gains. The one is the science gain, where you speak about energy on the target and energy out. And this is a scientific gain. And then next step is you look at the whole system. So this is what you call the engineering gain.
Okay.
And the engineering gain then includes all your other losses. In the case of Livermore, you have a very old laser. So you have fantastic, huge lasers that produce a lot of energy, but they're old. They are flash lamp pumped, they heat up. This is why you can only shoot them like every 5-6 hours or only once a day. And then they have to cool down again. The heat is a huge energy loss. So this is why what you call the wall plug efficiency is your energy that you pull from the plug, that you put into your laser, and then what you get out of the laser is a laser beam. And the efficiency of this laser is only 0.5%. So you use 99.5% of your energy already in your laser.
So if you take 200 kilowatts out of the grid, out of the plug, if you were to stick a plug in the wall for one of these lasers, which I'm sure you can't, if you took 200 kilowatts out, you would only have 1 kilowatt of energy in the scientific experiment, let's call it, right?
Exactly. This is exactly what happens. But this is, now we speak about engineering. We already, since this laser was built, there were huge advancements in laser technology. And the laser technology has been following Moore's law for the last 2 decades. So it means technology up, cost down, so the cost per watt extremely down, the energy level much higher, and we have switched from flashlight pumping to diode pumping. And diodes are semiconductors. They're produced like semiconductors. So it means they can be pushed down again in price and brought up in energy. Today, main driver is really how the diodes are produced. And these diodes are used for automotive manufacturing. So for the automotive laser that are used, they are meanwhile used for defense applications, for many other applications. This means that the efficiency that you have in solid-state lasers has increased from these 0.5% to, if you look at defense applications, to more than 20% meanwhile.
Okay.
And for a whole LCOE model, you roughly need a 10% efficient laser to get to a commercially viable power plant.
And commercially viable power plant for you is talking about creating 1 gigawatt. So you need to do 10 pulses a second to be able to get, in that case, 30 homes per second looked after. And if you can do that, you'll get to 1 gigawatt.
Yeah.
And if I've understood the maths earlier on, where you're building your plant at the moment, the atomic plant that it used to be created 2.6 gigawatts, and that was like 40%?
40% of fission. But meanwhile, fission uses a lot more energy.
Okay.
But that's right. Yeah.
Okay. But these are numbers you can really understand, even if it's only 10% of the whole state of Hessen. For those who don't know, Hessen's a big place. That's where Frankfurt is and all the surrounding area around this. We're talking about a whole state here. It's not just a small little town, right?
No, huge airport, huge internet hub, huge data centers.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. You've got the finance capital, you've got the airport, you've got a lot of industry as well in Hessen. Yeah. It's a lot of energy, huh?
Indeed. That's why we need it here. That's why we want to have it here.
But if we take a step back now, kind of like it wasn't really the OG, but one of the big moments in fusion energy was when Mikhail Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan got together and they wanted to create fusion for the whole world, for the whole society. I think they were kind of doing the lap of honor. They'd both done all the hard, heavy lifting. And then it was like, hey, what else can we do that could be good for our legacy? And they founded something called ITER, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, you described it pretty well. So it was so they looked for something where they could collaborate, and fusion seemed to be a good thing. So it's more a project that was had its foundation in a collaboration, not so much in the real approach to fusion. And that's from our point of view how it was managed, or how it is probably still managed. I mean, there are many credentials you can give to ITER because they have created a lot in material science. So there were a lot of inventions created by ITER over the last decades that we all can use, that all the startups can use, effectively use, and like materials, first of all materials. So for the magnetic fusion, it's the tapings. So everything you need for a lot what you need for magnetic fusion. So we are building a lot of the inventions that came from ITER. But from my point of view, mainly the startups and other research have overtaken ITER meanwhile.
Okay.
So the pace of how they develop, the pace of how they're building is too slow that you can always use the newest technology. And that's what you need. You always have to be at the edge of technology that you use in what you're building. And if you have like magnets being delivered from 15 different countries, that doesn't really make sense.
Okay, I get you. And when you talk about magnets, they use a totally different process to yourself, right?
Yes.
So they don't have what you call a pearl. They don't have that little feedstock of a little peppercorn that they shoot at with lasers. They do something completely different, right?
Yeah. So to simplify it, there are basically two main approaches to fusion: magnetic and inertial confinement. One is has a very loose plasma. It's a gas. It's a plasma, but it's a gas where the atoms are far away from each other. So this means if the atoms are very far away from each other, the probability of reactions is very low. That's why you have to hold this plasma for a long time to get enough reactions, to get enough neutrons out, to get enough energy. That's why you always read in magnetic fusion about records how long they could hold the plasma. It's like 50 seconds, 20 minutes. So ultimately, they need to hold the plasma almost forever and to produce energy. Inertial confinement is very different. It's not about the time, it's about the density of your plasma. So you have much less fuel, much less plasma. You have this tiny pellet, you compress it to 1,000 times solid density, so the atoms are very close to each other. You have almost 100% probability for reactions. And then you take the next one and next one. This is a pulsed approach, while the magnetic fusion is a continuous approach. And that's the difference. One is like, I always compare inertial confinement with a combustion engine or a diesel engine.
Okay.
That's how this works.
It's like the cylinder firing.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I understand. I see what you're saying. And that's one of the advantages you mentioned as well when we first met of fusion energy is if, you take the worst case scenarios, if there is a tidal wave, if there is an attack, a military attack or something, if somebody were to attack your power station, it would just stop working, right? There's no Chernobyl moment that we've got the next 40 years of we can't live there anymore.
Exactly. So just imagine there are lasers, and first thing, if something happens, an earthquake or a plane falls on a power plant, the lasers are not adjusted anymore. They would not hit the target, nothing. It just falls through, nothing happens.
Change from focused energy to defocused energy.
Exactly.
It's really, really brilliant to meet somebody who is changing the world. And, whether it's going to be your technology or a different one that in the end wins, it certainly sounds at the moment like there's quite a few players. And even if a few of them achieve it, if we think about the development of the automobile, they didn't all look the same at the start, right? And then it took, many years and many decades for us to get to that optimum thing. And these days people just say, oh, they all look the same. They came out of the same wind tunnel, which isn't true. I used to work in aerodynamics. But the fact of the matter is cars look pretty similar now. We've come to kind of the optimum shape for a car, the optimum way of building a diesel engine, petrol engine. But even then, we still got diesel, we still got petrol, we got hybrid now, we got electric now. And speaking to somebody like you, I really have to take my hat off to you because you're in it for the long game. You're not trying to do a quick win here. What you're doing is you're really building a new technology. And really that technology has the potential to change the world. If we think just about the oil industry, what a big impact it has on society. Whether you live in a country that has oil or doesn't have oil, whether you're, using oil where you live, whether you have the energy, like you say, to actually create electricity for hospitals, for living standards. And you're talking about completely changing this. And it sounds like this could be a really big game changer if fusion energy becomes commercially viable. So that's why we talk about the engineering game you mentioned. If we manage to do this, then I think we've really taken an enormous step towards reversing climate change. We've taken an enormous step towards creating a world in the future which is not just 10, but maybe 100 times better than the world we live in today. And I really want to thank you for taking the time, because I know you're a super busy man, flying between America and here in Hessen, and also Berlin and Munich, I believe, as well. I know you're away next week as well, and you're taking so much time today. And I really have to thank you for taking that time out.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, and looking forward to seeing you again.
Excellent. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks.
Cheers.